Hi, guys, welcome to Testify. Today, we're going to take a look at the book of Genesis and basically understanding it better as part of Bible study. So, Genesis means origin or the beginning of something. The book of Genesis is a book of creation and order because this is where we see God establishing himself as the creator who brings order and beauty out of chaos. Chaos because in the beginning the earth was formless and void. But after God's intervention and creation, chaos turned into beauty. God also creates humanity in his image and likeness. He created the earth in 6 days, and when he was pleased with his creation, he rested on the seventh day. Important to note that 7 is a number of completion and perfection. Genesis also records the origin or the beginning of sin, and this is recorded in chapter 3 with the fall of Adam and Eve. It brings in the introduction of sin, death, and brokenness into the world, while also introducing the promise of a future Redeemer. Now, God is not only a God of judgment, but also a God of redemption, and He promised us a future Redeemer in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. There are also two covenant relationships that are established in this book. The first covenant relationship is with Noah and his family. Now, Noah was a very faithful man, and he was instructed by God to build the ark and warn the people to turn from disobedience and sin, or the consequence would be death and destruction. But as a result, they didn't take the warning seriously and were all destroyed in the flood, except for Noah and his family and the animals, of course. The second covenant God made with Abraham, the father of all nations, and his lineage, Isaac and Jacob, promising to bless all nations through them. We also learn that God was not impressed with the Tower of Babel. This was because it was built out of human pride, and they were making a name for themselves rather than glorifying God or seeking Him or acknowledging Him. And by attempting to build a tower to heaven, they refused to scatter across the earth, which was a instruction from God. So basically, they were directly disobeying God's command to fill the earth. Eventually, God confused their language, and that explains how different languages were spread out across the world. And when God confused their language, this is when the building of the Tower of Babel ceased. We are introduced to the sons of Abraham, which are Isaac and Ishmael. Ishmael was the son of Abraham and Hagar. Hagar was Sarah's handmaid or servant at the time. And Sarah asked Abraham to have a child with her because at the time Sarah could not conceive. But eventually, through God's grace, He blessed Sarah and Abraham with their very own son Isaac at a very old age. Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. Jacob steals his brother Esau's blessings by lying to his father Isaac, who was blind at the time, by preparing a meal and posing as his brother Esau. Now, this is also reflected in the book of Hosea in chapter 12, where Prophet Hosea speaks of the history of Jacob, which mirrors disobedience, deceit, and explains the striving nature of the northern kingdom of Israel. Jacob later meets Rachel, and he wants Rachel's hands in marriage, but instead got tricked into marrying Leah. And if we think about this ironically, Rachel and Leah's father Laban tricked Jacob into marrying Leah. We can parallel this to the way Jacob tricked his father into blessing him instead of Esau. Nevertheless, Laban promised Jacob that he would give Rachel in marriage after another 7 hard years of labor. Leah was blessed with 7 children, 6 boys, who formed the 12 tribes of Israel. And Rachel, after years of barrenness, eventually conceived 2 boys, namely Joseph and Benjamin, when God eventually remembered her. Now Joseph was sold to slavery to the Ishmaelites because of him revealing a dream he had to his brothers, and that drove them to jealousy. So in a rage, they sold him to the Ishmaelites, and eventually he was sold to Potiphar. He worked for Potiphar, who found favor with him, and then he was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. Joseph was then thrown into prison. Pharaoh found favor with Joseph as Joseph interpreted some of Pharaoh's dreams, and he was then promoted to governor of Egypt. Later on, he reunited with his brothers who came to Egypt to buy grain because of the famine in their land, and his father Jacob and the entire family then came over to Egypt. Many messages, many lessons, and much information that we can gather from the book of Genesis. Firstly, that God is sovereign and He is the creator of all. It also teaches us that man is sinful and disobedient regardless. First of all, man was only given authority over all things on the earth. Man's authority has never been supreme. God is supreme. While man was given authority by God to rule, we must never forget that man is not God. Rather, man is created by God. God's intention is that we rule and reign upon the earth as servants and submit to Him who is creator. And we are not supposed to rule in a way that is self-serving. Rather, God intended that man rule over this world in a way that brings honor and glory to Him alone. It also teaches us that God is righteous, He is a covenant-keeping God, and He's a God who keeps promises, and that in all we do, we should include Him first. God who brings judgment also brings redemption through His Son, Jesus Christ. Although there were no laws or commandments given in Genesis in the Garden of Eden, God forbid Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The symbolism of the tree of knowledge of good and evil represents relying on one's own self, on one's own worth, on one's own works, and own logic, or reality as we call it, and that can lead to spiritual death. As a result, mankind cannot have eternal life because Adam and Eve didn't choose the tree of life, but chose to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God wanted Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of life, which symbolized reliance on God, and the tree of life is also a symbolism of Christ. As we know in John 14 verse 6, it says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." We do not rely on ourselves, on our own worth, on our own works, on logic or reality. We need to rely on God Himself. So today we also faced with a choice. Do we rely on ourselves and our good works to be taken to heaven? Or do we put our faith in the tree of life, which is Christ's finished work on the cross? I hope that this Bible study has assisted you to understand the book of Genesis. Take care and join us for more.